Well, welcome, and ladies and gentlemen, my portion here is to talk with you about diversity, equity, inclusion, and our context of why we're working on this today. First of all, as John Masterson, our president, shared with us just a couple of minutes ago, we simplify our college mission and guiding principles that we are a caring college, quality education in a caring atmosphere. And so because we're a caring college and we welcome everyone, we're open access, right? Working on diversity, equity, inclusion is just quite simply the right thing to do. Now, in addition to that, there are some compliance pieces and some things that we need to be mindful of. So I've brought those with me. And in our criteria for accreditation, that's what I have right here. Right? You all can find this on HLC's website. It's only 2 clicks in. Look for the criteria for accreditation. Under criterion 1, which is mission, this is the foundational piece of the criteria for higher education. Criterion 1C and 1C3, and here's what it says. The institution fosters a climate of respect among all students, faculty, staff, and administrators. This inclusion is from a range of diverse backgrounds, ideas, and perspectives. Let me read that one more time. The institution fosters a climate of respect among all students, faculty, staff, and administrators, from a range of diverse backgrounds, ideas, and perspectives. Now, when it's part of our criteria for accreditation of our college, and remember, we've been over almost at every convocation. Why do we seek accreditation? And it's 2 simple things. So our students have access to federal financial aid funds, and so our academic credits transfer to other accredited institutions. That being said, because it's a point of criteria, we write to that and we are evaluated on that during our visits from the HLC staff. Peer reviewers that come from other colleges. We had about 1.5 years ago, as you all remember, an HLC visit, and we had 3 reviewers come from different parts of the country. We wrote about a 100-page assurance argument. And then we had, I believe, 251 pieces of evidence to support that assurance argument. In our feedback, when our visitors were talking to us, they had a couple things to point out. Among those was our mission and guiding principles, which I have right here. Dr. First Bowie, our lead, said to us, we can see that you all are a caring, inclusive college. We can see that, right, when we visit you and talk with you. But we don't see it in your materials. When we review your curriculum, you say in your mission and guiding principles that we want our students to take their place as productive members of a global community. We say in our mission, we wish to foster diversity within the student body, administration, faculty, and staff. They said that they have no doubt we're doing that, but we're not showing it. They couldn't find the evidence of it. Where is it in your curriculum that you're preparing students to be part of a global community? So, we say this to our students all the time. Show your work. Show your work. And so we're going to be doing that in our task force. Among the different things that we're going to be doing, we're going to be building web pages to talk about what we do. This convocation is part of showing our work. They encouraged us to work on HR and our resources, our human resources area. And we'll be doing that next year as part of our objectives. Now, that being said, believe it or not, we knew this. We knew this before our visitors. Okay? We started our DEI task force a year before our visit because we knew we needed to work on these things. And so we were able to show the visiting team, we have a task force. We started this a year ago. Right? So it's not in any way, please don't connotate that we were cited for this. We were not. But we were strongly encouraged to work on it and to improve, do better, and show our work. And so that's what we're doing. Among the task force's objectives was to help us, and this was from last year, was to help us define what do diversity, equity, and inclusion mean. This work has been done for, I would estimate, 4 to 5 years, very strong, the past 4 to 5 years, very strongly in the business community. And it is filtering into the education community to be able to define these things for your institution. And so that was the first objective. We greatly appreciate the HLC feedback, especially when they confirm things that we kind of already knew, because we started that. To start this off, one of the things that we would like to do is to recognize the task force members. And so from 2018-2019, I'm going to read off the task force members, and if these people would please stand, we'd really appreciate it. The task force leaders were Katie Mitchell and Terry Piazza, and we greatly appreciate their work. If you would stand up. Task force members included Josiah D'Albini, Vince DeGrotto, Sarah Evans, Eric Griffith, Tracy Lee, Sandy Moore, Aaron O'Keefe, Amy Thompson, and Savannah Williams.
Oh, now you stand up.
And task force members from 2019-2020. Katie and Terry graciously agreed to continue leading the task force for a second year. And so again, task force members, if you would, it seems we have a theme, we're bouncing up this morning, we're standing in the city, but if you would please stand up. Josiah D'Albini, Jeff DeBlanc, Dana Carter, Vince DeGrotto, Shanice Douglas, Todd Francis, Eric Griffith, Danielle Johnson, Mike Marsh, Jeremy McGinnis, Amy Peaton, Shelley Regier, Fernando Robles, and Heather Van Dyne. So thank you all so much. So continuing through the day, all of our sessions are themed in DEI. So today's general session presentation is very important because it lays the foundational groundwork of the rest of our sessions for today and hereafter. So thank you for this time of introduction, and I'd like to introduce Katie Mitchell and Josiah D'Albini.
You both stay right here.
Yes, we love technology. Welcome again, and as John already mentioned, what we're showing you is actually the work of all the people who stood up or didn't stand up a few minutes ago. And this is also 2 years worth of work that we're presenting. The task force started in the 2018-2019 year, but this is the first time we're standing before all of you. We are the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or DEI, task force. We could have a better acronym, yes, definitely. As John mentioned, kind of our primary charge, especially during our first year of work, was to research and really work on definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion for the college. Today, obviously, we'll be moving more into the discussion of what those things look like at Allen, and then education, especially either through engaging with you all or through getting more of our messages out through college materials. Those are kind of part of what we'll continue to do through this year. So full primary charges there: research, discuss, educate, and promote diversity, equity, and inclusion of all people at the college for creating an even more vibrant culture and welcoming atmosphere. In 2018-19, we were given 3 specific objectives, which I've mentioned 2 of here. Josiah will go into more detail about them. And one of our objectives goes into addressing the strategic plan, goal 2D, improving diversity consciousness. And as you can see, there are very specific suggested strategies within the college's strategic plan. And many of these will be moving into in this coming year and beyond.
Okay, so to begin with what the task force was doing, in order to discuss anything that is DEI, we had to know exactly what our definitions were. We ended up doing some research with the students and with faculty and staff through the surveys we did last year, and we'll talk more about that. But in your papers for convocation today, it includes the definitions that the task force worked all last year at creating. Essentially, what is diversity for Allen Community College, what is equity, and then what is inclusion. So I'm just going to read those to you because you might not have the paper in front of you, and sometimes it's better to hear it out loud. And then we're also going to have a session later on in which we discuss the definitions and what they are for the college. So diversity is the range of identities that may exist within a given community, which may include but is not limited to race, ethnicity, national origin, immigration status, geographic location, language, culture, religion, gender, gender identification, sexual orientation, mental and physical ability and attributes, age, marital status and parental status, work, education and life experience, military experience, worldview, and political affiliation. So that's a very long definition because one thing that we noted in our conversations is that when we think diversity, we only think about the visual. And it's not always the visual that is the best when it comes to diversity because we have so many different things, so many different life experiences just within our task force of 8 to 10 people. There's so many different differences between us. And so we want to make sure that we cover all of that and that no one is ever actually left out because that's the big thing about diversity. Equity is the quality of being fair and just to each person or groups of people in a given community by ensuring that historically underserved and underrepresented populations have reasonable access to opportunities and outcomes. And so that's what this picture is here in the corner. So you have equality, which is everybody being treated the same, and then equity is everybody being able to be at the exact same level through supports that we offer. And so we're going to be working on those. And then inclusion is the act of creating and maintaining an atmosphere that fosters dignity and respect for all individuals. Pretty self-explanatory there with the definition for that. Do you want to do
That?
Actually, if you could do that. So our process when we did this, what we did was each person on the task force took, we essentially created a grid, and so you had colleges, universities, and businesses, and we broke it up at the diversity, how do businesses approach diversity? How do they approach equity? How do they approach inclusion? Same thing with colleges and universities. And we broke that down to see how should we break that down for us. And then that's how we eventually worked towards our surveys that we administered. Last fall, we worked with students, both campuses, both Burlingame and the Iowa one. And then last spring, we sent the survey out to staff and to faculty.
So after we did our kind of, as a task force, research and discussion definition process, we took those definitions and these terms to students. Some of you guys may have helped us by letting us administer paper surveys to your students. It was really important to us to get some representation on both of our campuses, both of our physical campuses, because we know that in terms of diversity, there are different types of diversity represented by the Burlingame and Iowa campuses, and that's not even to mention online and distance learning. So we had we're not going into, what's statistically significant, et cetera, but we had at least a representation of students from both campuses. We asked them to tell us about a number of aspects of the college and how diverse they thought those things were, how equitable they thought services provided were, and how inclusive those services or aspects of the college were. Now, we had kind of a chicken and the egg problem. Can we ask students to tell us how diverse student services, or equitable would be a better example, how equitable are our student services if we don't know whether students know what it is to be equitable? So we kind of solved that problem by giving a general, this is more or less what diversity, this is more or less what equity is, as students requested in the individual classrooms. Does that sound right, Terry? But we didn't give them our full-fledged definitions, because part of what we were also asking was, do you know what these things are? When we ask students to rank these things, we're also getting data about things like, do students know what student services are? Do they know the difference between faculty and staff? And I think we actually didn't ask them to differentiate between faculty and staff, because when you're trying to collect social science data, if people don't know what you're asking them, the responses you get back aren't very good, right? But at any rate, some of the conclusions we could get based on what students told us, we asked them to rank on a scale of 0 being not diverse at all to 5 being very diverse, our student body, our student services, et cetera, et cetera. And what we noticed was that students saw our student body as fairly diverse, faculty and staff as less so. This is a mean or an average of 3.3 out of 5, so still on the somewhat diverse side, but it stands to note that this was the lowest score that they gave of anything as far as students, student services, activities, curriculum, faculty and staff. They saw faculty and staff as the least diverse. And one of the things we know is that students, and this is HLC highlighted this, students would like to see themselves, their types of diversity represented in the faculty and staff that are serving them. And that is a challenge being in rural southeastern Kansas. Equity, the students saw us as fairly equitable across all dimensions as far as, are we equitable in the way we provide student services and the activities in our curriculum, et cetera. The fact that students' answers were so similar to each other on nearly every one of those questions does leave open the question, did students really know what we were asking them? Fair question. Likewise with inclusion, students seemed to think that we were fairly inclusive and there was not a lot of range in their average responses to those questions. We also included some open-ended responses to shed light especially on some of these where we weren't really sure what students were telling us. And for me, one of the big takeaways is students think we're doing a fairly good job. We're being fairly equitable, fairly inclusive. They may or may not always be 100% clear on what equity and inclusion are. Josiah or Terry or any task force member, anything you want to add? All right. Then we tried to replicate the survey with faculty and staff. Some of you guys may remember getting a request via email to fill out a survey. We ended up getting 49 responses. For you all, we did break down because we know the difference between faculty and staff. So we got 25 non-teaching staff and administrative responses. We got 24 faculty responses. And then this is a separate. We have 42 responses in both these categories from the Iowa campus, 7 from the Burlingame campus. And we asked the same things. We gave you guys kind of a matrix to rank how diverse, how equitable, and how inclusive we are on certain aspects of what we do. And then we had some open-ended. Like students, you saw our students as fairly diverse, our faculty and staff as less so. Like students, you thought that we're fairly equitable in terms of student services, activities, curriculum, etc. And inclusion, let's see here. You saw our curriculum is slightly less inclusive, our faculty as more so, and I'm assuming inclusion there, inclusivity means interactions towards students. And then there were a range of open-ended responses. There were some individual kind of campus-specific type things, like when we're thinking about Burlingame, do we have places for students to nurse? That was the one that stuck out in my mind. But again, keep in mind that we have 2 different physical campuses with kind of, again, 2 sets of needs, perhaps. And one of the things that stuck out to me in our open-ended responses, when we asked people kind of what does being inclusive, what does being equitable mean in whatever it is that you do here at the college, some people said that being equitable and inclusive was about treating everyone the same, and about an equal number of people said being equitable and inclusive is recognizing and acting with regard to differences among students. And I don't think we have an answer to the question of which is the correct answer. I mean, if we go back to Josiah's slide, this is treating everyone the same. This is recognizing differences. Obviously, we are teachers and administrators and people who have to work with processes that require that we treat everyone in a standardized way on some level. But it also kind of, I guess, begs the question, in what ways can we stack boxes for the people and students we're working with at times to help them see over the fence, reach whatever the goal is that we're working with them towards?
Can we just buy tickets to the game?
Let's just buy everyone tickets.
Yes, that's what
That would be like a private four-year university.
That being said, with equity and inclusion, if you're doing your job when it comes to equity and inclusion, you're getting rid of the barrier. And so you're getting rid of the fence, you're getting rid of the boxes, that way they can just watch the game. There's other diagrams that show it as, instead of it being the wooden fence, it's a metal fence that we see in yards, where everybody can see the game, where nobody is obstructed, and a lot of times they call that justice.
Yes, ma'am.
Katie, I would just add, I don't want to give the false impression that our students didn't know what we were asking them. I would just add that in the written responses where we asked for additional comments or what does this mean to you, there were quite a few extremely intelligent and in-depth responses from our students about what those three qualities are. So I want to throw that in there as well, that we were quite impressed with many of the written responses.
Yeah. And if you're interested in seeing those, curious about them, etc., let us know. We have copies of them. They're anonymous, so we can share them with you, etc. So we define terms. We got a baseline as to where students, faculty, and staff think we are. And then at the end of 2018-2019, we made recommendations to the President's Council, and I believe you were talking about those,
Yep.
Josiah. And these are based on both our findings and obviously our charge as a task force.
So Terry, Katie, and I met with President's Council with what our recommendations are following the research that we had done the last academic year. And so in front of you, you can see that it was research and revise current hiring practices. It's one thing that we noticed that we don't really include any DEI within our hiring. Cultural competency training, and then events, activities to reach diverse students, communities on both campuses, and that falls more under the education aspect of what our charge is to provide these activities, provide these events that are going to be educational for students on both campuses, on all three campuses, about diversity, equity, and inclusion in different aspects, in different cultures, and everything that relates to that. And then general education to include a cultural diversity studies option. We're seeing that is already included at the 4 years within their general education, is that they break it down based on components and what the learning components are. And so looking at possibly adding that to our degrees here, and not necessarily just branching out and creating new classes, but maybe seeing if there's classes that already fall within that, that we offer now. Convocation speakers, so other than ourselves, having somebody come in. I attended the Telford conference this past fall, and it's put on by the Kansas Board of Regents, and it's free to all higher education entities, and it was all about diversity and inclusion. And so looking at bringing some speakers to that, whether it be from other universities or anybody who is a public speaker about anything that falls within what our task force is working on. And then review of the college web pages and materials, just updating those to make sure that they coincide with what our definitions are. Because we don't want to do this work and then have nothing to show for it, have nothing else within the college reflect what we've been working on and what we're striving to achieve. So for this year and on, we have two buckets essentially. One is the education and training. So that's partly what we're doing right now. That's partly what we're doing today, and what we're going to do in the future with convocations. And then the other one is collaborating with other areas of the college to incorporate DEI, and that's what I spoke about with the last slide. Working with Tara to update the website, working with Ryan to get events that are for the students and for the community.
And we have a list of these
Yeah.
objectives. They're just too numerous. We're not going to put you through us reading them all to you verbatim, but if you're interested, we can share this
Yeah.
with you as well.
Working with Shelley to get some trainings going on, but also to look at possibly making some changes with our hiring practices. Just to make sure that we're doing what we're saying and we're not just doing window dressing, essentially.
And I guess my final words I would leave you all with is just encourage you to keep thinking about like what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean to you here in the work you do. I speak obviously from my space as like a white woman who teaches a certain class. That's my role at the college. I'm on this campus. But think about kind of the types of diversity that you encounter, maybe the types of diversity that you don't always acknowledge. One of the things I think about a lot with my students is at this campus, we're a very full-time activities-centered type campus. So I think, what about my commuter students who are part-time? So diversity doesn't always mean, you know, the obvious visible things, and we tried to get at that with our definition. So I encourage you today to think about our definition of diversity and then think about how that can be used, your kind of awareness of what are the actual diversities of the students and people you're working with, how you can then use that to be more equitable and inclusive in whatever it is you do at the college. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen,